Welcome everyone to live stream 21 of the Space Shooter DevVenture. So the last time we were busy with our, just give me 1 second. We were trying to fix, or maybe not fix, but we were trying to shift across to a better way of doing the testing seek behavior and general enemy ship behavior control, right? So for now, we are only interested in getting back to where we were, but in a better way. And from then we can move on into more advanced things beyond seek, right? So chase and flee and move in, fly in formation, and follow the leader, and all kinds of other behaviors that we would want for our enemy ships to possess, to be able to move with. And then also, before that, of course, we want to have an enemy pirate ship or an enemy defender even, depending on the player mode, right? We want an enemy ship that can fire at a target based on whatever criteria, right? So if it's close enough, or if it's within, so when it's close enough, or if it has, so I'm still thinking about this, right? But I mean, most of the time it's when it's close enough and confident enough because it's close enough, right? So close enough that it's not likely to miss. Then fire a few times and then redirect, change course and fly away to a safe distance. Then turn around and repeat, and do this like swoop, shoot, and flee, or something, right? But to get that right, to have that full behavior, we do need some kind of flee behavior, which is the opposite of seek, right? Seek is zoom in on a specific target, and flee is zoom out from that target, right? Get away from it. Right, so let's get back to the script, although I did want to show, I think it was under media, yeah, creator notes. I suppose I should probably open this in a file manager so I can access my my notes. Sort by name. Okay, so while Krita is opening, we can go back to our script editor and try and figure out exactly what we need to do. Okay, here we go. Krita's open, so never mind. We want to make sure that the enemy ship controller can select any of its listed enemy ships. All right, and one of the things we need to make sure about is that the enemy ship can be one of the things we need to ensure is that even when an enemy ship is destroyed, that the enemy ship controller still keeps it in the array and it keeps track of its status, right? So if I zoom in on this space down here, we make a small note down in this corner in a different color. So let's go with orange, maybe something like this. We say note well that enemy ship controller should always, oh, that needs to be uppercase for emphasis, should always track all enemy ships. Okay, so that when an enemy ship is destroyed, it knows, okay, well, that one's destroyed, and so if respawning is allowed, I need to respawn it. And if respawning is not allowed, I need to know not to send signals to it anymore. I need to know not to send it to other waypoints or do any behaviors. It should be ignored. And, you know, you might think, okay, well, in that case, why not just remove it from the array, right? It would be more efficient. You don't have to waste space anymore. You just clear that space in memory, and the enemy ship controller should continue as normal and display the same behavior you want, right? It ignores the thing and you're saving space. But by doing so, you again, then you have to have different modes, or you have more complexity to manage, right? Oh, but what happens if we do allow respawning? Then you think about the case of when you do allow respawning, and you'd say, okay, so I'm arguing with myself basically at this time, right? So it's like, right now I'm arguing with myself. One stance is for removing the enemy ships from the array when they are destroyed, and the other stance is against it, right? Keep it, and just mark it as defeated or destroyed or whatever you want to call it, right? Eliminated or neutralized, whatever word you want to use. But you keep it in the array where it was, with its ID and everything. You keep it there. So the stance against keeping it there would say, right, okay, well, if you want to have respawning allowed, why not destroy this one, remove it from the array, and when the time comes to respawn, you instantiate a new enemy instance, right? An entirely new one. Now, the stance for keeping it in the array would then argue back and say, okay, well, no, because what happens if you want to have some kind of revenge mechanic, right? Where the defeated enemy pirate, let's say we are playing as the defender, and you destroy a pirate, and that pirate is now has this mechanic for revenge, right? Then that destroyed pirate marks you as the defender, or maybe an NPC defender who's your ally, marks that ally as its target, and it like hones in on him, and it wants to, like, it goes for him directly, and for revenge. You can't have that if you eliminate the instance from this array, right? If the enemy ship controller loses track of that enemy, it can't persist any of its data, right? So how many enemies did it destroy? How much resources did it collect? How far did it travel throughout the match, right? Let's say you're playing some kind of online death match or whatever, right? Or free for all or whatever. You can't keep track of any of these statistics. And so there's again that complexity and space trade-off. So there's a complexity trade-off where you give up the space. You're like, I don't care. I don't want to use up too much space, but I'm willing to add additional complexity to my game in order to achieve that, And then the other stance is, no, I don't care about complexity. In fact, I'm avoiding complexity because complexity always breeds more errors than it needs, or rather more errors than it's worth, right? And okay, maybe not always, but most of the time, right? So if you can avoid complexity and achieve the same outcome, then why not, right? So the answer to that, of course, is what are you willing to give up in exchange for that reduction in complexity? And in this case, giving up additional space, You're just taking up more space with your game, right? So always, I'm going to take that stance. Always keep track of enemy ships. 10 minutes on one explanation. Okay. So, back to Godot engine. We've got this error. Enemy ship. Get node or null enemy ship. Oh yeah, okay, so there should be enemy ships at an index. So this enemy ship ID int and waypoint ID int. So there should also be enemy ship ID int, enemy ship ID of type int, and a waypoint ID of type int. All right, and then, oh, oops, it shouldn't be there. It should be here. Find enemy for waypoint ID. Too few arguments. Well, then I suppose it does need to have one here too. And so then it does need to have enemy ship ID. And waypoint ID. Then this would become enemy ships at position. Enemy ship ID -1. Because remember, we want the IDs to be natural numbers and not integer numbers, because integer numbers start from 0, right? So, well, they don't. They don't start from 0, they start from -infinity, but they include 0. Whereas the natural numbers start from 1 and count up. So it would be 1, 2, 3, all the way up, right? And for the enemy IDs, we want them to be natural numbers because, just because, right? Because the ID is more for us than it is for the game. And if I go up to the ready function, you'll see here, when we create enemy ship ID, it should be iterator +1. Shouldn't it? No, it's not. Okay. Well, I suppose the label is. So if I go, for example, to enemy ship behavior, then you'll see here with the set label, the label text is an ID +1, right? And I don't think that's necessary, honestly. It's just additional confusion. Because again, the ID is, for me, it's for debugging purposes more than anything else. And if I go to the waypoint behavior, I can do the same thing down here. If ID here ID. It's just the ID. Okay, so that means waypoint in position 0 would be waypoint 0, and waypoint in position 10 would be waypoint 9. Okay, and so now if I go to this one, we don't have to say iterator +1, and we don't have to say iterator -1. Where's this thing now? Here, don't have to say this, just say that. Okay, and then select a random waypoint. Just returns a waypoint, so that's okay. It was down here, right? get node. We don't have to get the node. We just have to say waypoints at. Because we don't want a waypoint path. We want a node, right? So we're returning a node. This will give us a node. We don't need a node path. And so that's fine. Select random waypoint, find enemy for waypoint, on enemy reached waypoint, and move enemy to waypoint, move enemy to a random waypoint. This one needs to have an enemy ship ID as well, right? So let's give this as a parameter, and then just use enemy ship ID instead. Because we want it generalized. Remember, we want to be able to say any enemy ship, just go to a random waypoint, right? And so for this one, we have to say the same thing. Just for now, we can change it later, right? In fact, let's do that now. So we want a function called getRandomEnemyShip. And this one should genuinely not take any parameters. It just takes, it just chooses a, I'm just trying to think about this for a second. The waypoints array in enemy ship controller has no waypoints in it because it just doesn't, right? It just doesn't. And that's really irritating. I only realize now that I need to have a variable for onReady. Actually, I need to have a function for setting the size. Set the size for this, and set the size for this, and then call the update function. Because again, so I realize that I'm jumping around quite a bit, and that's not necessarily the best for you who's trying to follow me in the audience. So let me try and explain this in the best way I can. All right, so we'll save this file, and then we'll open a new file, and we'll explain this better. Okay, so I'm going to explain this in terms of rectangles. Okay, so a rectangle will represent a scene, right? So we've got a scene here, scene there, and then we've got another scene here. Okay, and now I'm going to draw a circle, or an ellipse. Actually, it's not a circle unless it's perfectly circular, right? In general, it's called an ellipse. So just being technical for no reason, I suppose. But yeah, we've got an ellipse over here, and an ellipse represents not a scene. Oh, outline, fill, not filled. And then we'll just do that again. We don't want it filled. Just do the outline. Thank you. Okay. So a rectangle represents a scene, and an ellipse represents a singleton. Remember what I explained. A singleton, if I go back to Godot Engine, if I go to my project settings, you'll see there's this tab called globals. All right. So a singleton is a function. Oh, sorry, not a function, a script. It's a script that I have enabled as a global variable, which means that in any scene throughout the entire game, I can access all of the functionality within that script. Okay, so I can access the variables, I can call the functions, I can do all of those things. And so because I've made it into a singleton, I make it into a circle or an ellipse rather than a rectangle, because a rectangle seems more rigid by my own internal logic, right? So it's more rigid, it's more inflexible than an ellipse, which is more like a bouncy ball that can squish and bounce and go all over the place. Whereas if you drop a rectangle, it's going to fall like a brick and just block around on the floor once or twice and then it's done. So now I'm going to switch over to my pen and we'll call this one the main menu, or we'll call this the menu scene sequence. So it's got its own internal progression of the scenes. Okay. And so this is the main menu and it's tied to the pause menu. Okay, so pause menu. Menu. And this is the main menu. Okay. Scene. Scene. Right. And so this one is the enemy ship controller actually. There should be another singleton on top here for the pause menu singleton. Okay. And so that's the pause menu singleton. So pause menu singleton. Singleton. Okay. And then this one is the enemy ship controller singleton. So let's write that out. Enemy ship controller singleton. And then this one we'll call current scene, whatever the scene is, because it's a placeholder scene, right? So we'll say current level scene. Right. So what I want to do here is explain to you how having those arrays here doesn't mean much, because doesn't mean much for the current scene. Okay. And if I open up Krita again here, right? So if I start from the pause or from the main menu, right? Pause menu or main menu, doesn't matter, because we're starting from one of these two things, right? If we are in a current scene and we open the pause menu and switch levels, it's the same as if we had started the game from scratch and then chosen a level. Same thing, right? It calls a signal out to the enemy ship controller saying, hey, by the way, we're moving over to a new scene, so do your thing, right? And then it sends a message back saying, okay, so this is saying change scene. Then it sends a menu back and goes, okay, which one? Right? So this is step 1. This is step 2. Okay. And then it sends another message back going this way. Step 3, start. Right? And then this one says, step 4, I started. Same thing. I started. Right? So that's step 4 and step 4 as well. Right? And now enemy ship controller goes back to this one. Well, no, that's 5 actually. How many? And then 2 things. Enemy ships and waypoints. Then this thing goes back and says, okay, in step 6, it's got M enemy ships and N waypoints. And again, so M and N are just numbers, right? Any particular number. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. And then it's just a placeholder. I've run out of space. So maybe let's do this. A freehand curve all the way around, kind of like that. You're just gonna have to excuse that outrageously inefficient arrow. Right? So there we have the 7th exchange. Right? It doesn't have to be these many exchanges and signals and whatever. It's just this is the sequence of things for our own understanding of what needs to happen. Right? And it might actually come to being a 7-stage process in the end. But it's more for my communication to you, right? This is what should happen, or why it's important that we need to be able to set the number of waypoints and the number of enemies per scene and not keep it in the singleton specifically. So it then goes, okay, thanks, I suppose. Thanks. And then in brackets, sets array sizes. And then a thumbs up emoji, because why not? Okay. And that's the sequence, right? So it goes, if I switch over to my normal mouse, it goes, okay, hey, I've changed scenes. Then enemy ship controller goes, okay, which one then the main menu or the pause menu goes to the scene itself, not the enemy ship controller. It goes, hey, you, scene, begin, right? And then the scene that has been instructed to start goes, hey guys, I've started. It goes, enemy ship controller singleton, hey, I've started, by the way. And it sends back to the main menu acknowledgement, right? Hey, I've started. You told me to start. Here I am. I've started. Okay. Then the enemy ship controller singleton comes back and says, okay, well, how many enemy ships and how many waypoints? Then the current level scene goes, well, I've got M enemy ships and I've got N waypoints. Then the enemy ship controller sends back some kind of acknowledgement to the current scene and goes, okay, thanks. And then internally, it sets those sizes for the array. Okay, so we don't want an onReady variable for these arrays. And these arrays have an internal variable called size, right? Array.size. We can just say array.size equals whatever, right? And that's fine. So we need some kind of signal from somewhere to trigger a function within the enemy ship controller to say, you need to update the size of these arrays. So now you understand why I need to have this function, and you're not stuck with this confusion as to what is he doing right now, just jumping around all over the place. Let's make that function. 1, 2, 3, and here. So we got function on update enemy ships size. Enemy ship size. Okay, takes in an integer an integer variable called new size, and that is of type integer. And then we just say enemy ships dot size is assigned new size. Dot resize. Yeah, enemy ships dot resize to new size. Okay, and then we have another function which we need to create. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we call this one function on update waypoint size. We call waypoints dot resize to be new size, and then we just pass that as a variable in here as well, new size of type integer. All right, so these are signal functions because they start with underscore on, right? That's a prefix. It's not compulsory, but it's just good notation, good nomenclature, and a good standard to follow, right? And we need these signals to be connected somehow. And the best way to do this is that's a good question. How are we going to do this? Because I don't want to have to say for each level how many enemies is it going to have. I suppose we'll have to. Damn, that's annoying. Maybe not. Maybe not. No, no, no. We can do it as a resource. We can do it as a resource. What is it complaining about? It's just complaining about all of these enemy ship variables. Those are old. We can leave those, right? So now I just want to make sure before we continue that everything is as it should be before we move on to new changes. That all the changes I've made are complete up to now and aren't missing anything, right? So we'll start from the top and we'll work our way down. Okay. So I see that I have a live viewer. Can you just let me know if you can hear me? Because I remember in the last 2 live streams, there was some recording, well, audio issues with my voice. So if you don't mind just writing in the chat, if you can hear me clearly, I would appreciate that very much. And in the meantime, I'll continue. So we start off with these 2 waypoint and enemy ship arrays, right? Then we've got a signal for waypoint ID assigned, a signal for enemy ship ID assigned. Amazing, thank you. Glad you can hear me. So now if I go into the ready function, we should have loops, right? We should have loops to establish not to establish, but to set up those arrays, right? So add waypoints and add enemy ships to those arrays and don't keep them empty. But here's the thing, right? Waypoints dot size. So this is where I went on my whole explanation about why it's important to have the m and n values, right, of these 2 arrays, right? How big are they? They're not necessarily the same size, so you can't use just one variable, right? They can't both necessarily be m. They could be, but not always. So they have to have 2 variables, m and n. And it doesn't make sense to store them inside a singleton, which is a generalized global script. It needs to be specific to a scene or specific to an entity, not even necessarily a scene. It could just be the enemy ship itself that can keep that variable, although that doesn't really make sense in this context. It's just, I don't want to confuse you guys with unnecessary possibilities, so I'm not going to carry on with that. Anyway, so once we have the array size, okay, I just realized something. I need to have an update array. I need to have an update array function that updates the waypoint or the enemy ships, the waypoints or the enemy ships array, depending on the updated size, right? So when I go back down here, I'm calling the resize, but I'm not populating the array. And that's not the way to do things, right? So if I do, I had it here. Here we go. If I do instantiate, just switch to my cursor. Okay, so if I do if I do instantiate a new enemy ship, for example, right? I used to have 8. Well, I used to have 9 because it starts at 0, right? So 0 through to 8 is 9, and adding on 9 makes it 10. So I used to have 9 enemy ships. Now I add to the size, right? So now there's space for 10 enemy ships. So it doesn't make sense for me to leave this blank. I need to populate it with another enemy ship. And I don't increase or decrease the size of the array unless that change is valid, right? So for example, let me use a concrete example that will make it easier to understand. If I had 4 enemy ships, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3. I have 4 enemy ships in the scene, and I want to add an additional enemy ship to the scene. Only at this time do I increase the size. Do I resize that array to be of size 5, right? So then it has up until index 4 because it starts from index 0, right? And then if for whatever reason I want to decrease the size to like size 3, so there's only 0, 1, and 2, that means I have to delete these 2 ships. And I don't call resize unless I want to delete those 2 ships. So I hope that makes sense, right? That you don't call resize unless you are actively adding or removing entities from a scene. So because of that, I need to actually add entities to the scene or remove them from the scene, right? Which means I need to have an actual update enemy ship and update waypoint array function. So let's add them in. Now that you know why I'm doing it, let's do it. So that's 3 lines there. Okay. So the 3-line rule is my own thing. It's not compulsory. And it just makes things clearer for me to know. Okay, so it's like, okay, well, at the end of this function, there's a huge gap before the next function. That means that this function is definitely finished, and this is clearly a new function. If it was just one line, it would be harder to understand, because here you can see I have a single line separation between the declaring, before the declaration of a new if statement or an else if statement or an else statement, I have lines clearly separating them. And that again is not compulsory. It's just easier for me to see when the body of one if statement ends and the declaration of a new if statement begins. It's just easier to see. There's clear separation. It's easier to read, easier to follow. It's just my own convention that I follow. Okay. And so I have one separation for an internal, one line of separation internally and 3 lines of separation externally. So now you know why I do 3 lines and why I'm pedantic about it. So like once you start getting to a point where you have a lot of code to go through to understand what you're doing, and you have errors to fix and things, these kinds of quality of life changes really do matter. So function, we'll call this update enemy ships, and we're taking in the new size, right? So we'll call this updated size, and that is of type int. So now we create a for loop, and we have this initialize for loop here for the enemy ships. And if I go back down here, I can paste that here and just modify it slightly. Okay, so the range function has a start point, an end point, and the steps, just like Python. So if you see from the, trying to find the right word, the hover pop-up, whatever that box is called, the box that comes up when I hover over this thing, it explains there are 3 different versions of the range function. The first one is range n, and that one starts automatically from 0, and it runs up to but not including n, right? So it goes from 0 up to n minus 1. So if n was 10, it would go from 0 to 9. And then range b and n starts from b and increases by steps of 1, increments in steps of 1 until n minus 1. So if I said range 3, 10, it would start from 3 and go up to 9. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And then in the last one, it's range B, N, and S, right? So it's the same as B and N. So it starts from 3, goes until 9, but now I can tell it go in steps of 3 instead of steps of 1, because S is the increment size. And so now I can say 3, 6, 9, because I said from 3 to 10 in steps of 3. So now it will print out 3, 6, and 9, or it will not necessarily print out, but it will go through those 3 iterations. Okay, so now I can call enemy ships dot old size. So I should actually have two, the old size and a new size. So I should call a variable here, variable old size is enemy ships dot size, and then I call this thing with old size and updated size. So that's old size of type integer and an updated size of type integer. And why is it complaining about this? Old size is not used, is it? Is that what it's saying? Old size, unused. Yes. Okay. So I just want to check again with the chat. Are you guys able to follow with what I'm explaining, or am I jumping around too much and confusing you? So I'll carry on in the meantime, but yeah, I would appreciate that kind of feedback, right? So I'm not just rambling on in a way that is incoherent. I want to make sure that you guys are following along. So we call resize, and then we call a function here, update enemy ships with old size and new size. Well, oh, I see. So this should be waypoints, not enemy ships. And update waypoints. And then this is waypoints dot size. And now it's complaining because it doesn't have a function for update waypoints yet. So we can create that, and then it will be quiet. So function update waypoints takes in an old size and a new size. Old size of type int and an updated size of type int. Okay, thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. I'm glad to see that you guys are able to follow me. Right, so we'll just say pass for now. So pass is a placeholder word. It just prevents the script editor from throwing a tantrum saying, hey, you can't have a function declaration with no body. And so the pass keyword just says, I'm going to eventually write a body for this function, but ignore it for now that it doesn't have a body. It's okay. Just keep the place. It's a placeholder, right? And if I come back up here, so this is for update waypoint size. We can do the same thing for update enemy ship size. And so let's do that. We say update enemy ships with the old size and what it's enemy ships dot size. Yes. it's going to complain saying that old size doesn't work because it's not available in the current scope. So let's make it old size is enemy ships dot size before we resize it. So we get the size just before we call resize, store that as old size, then we call resize with this, the new size that we add in. Right? So we call this function, we give it a parameter called new size. This is the size we want to set enemy ships array to, right? And then before we do that change, before we say, okay, well, the array is now of size new size, we save the current size as the old size, and then we resize it. And the reason for that will be clear in a moment, right? So just before we resize it, we store the old size, then we resize it, and now we call this update function with the old size and the new size, right? And in the for loop, now remember what I told you earlier, that there's this version of the range function that has both b and n instead of just having n, because at the moment this is n, right? This is that variable n, which means it will run from 0 up until enemy ships dot size minus 1 in steps of 1, right? But what happens if I don't want to go through all of the previous and currently existing enemy ships? What happens if I just want to add the additional enemy ships from the resize? Okay, so this is assuming that we aren't reducing. We are not reducing the size of the array. We are only increasing it, right? We're not decreasing, we are only increasing. And again, that's because I made this note earlier. Remember, we made this note, right? We said, note well, enemy ship controller should always track all enemy ships, right? So even if it's destroyed or if it's no longer going to be active in the scene, it should still be tracked in that array, right? So, you know, maybe that doesn't make sense to you. Maybe you are from the group that is against wasting space and for preserving space and efficiency, right? But I am rather for reducing complexity and against increasing it. So let's just and it's not necessarily because I'm lazy. I am to a point, but it's just it's more that I don't want to introduce bugs and problems to my code that could have been avoided, right? That's the reason why I don't really like the idea of adding additional complexity unless there's a very good reason or unless it's absolutely compulsory, right? That this is just the way things are going to be, right? For the feature that you want, this is the complexity. If you don't like it, then don't add the feature. So coming back to this, we're going from old size we're going from old size to enemy ships dot size in steps of 1, okay? And this means that we are starting at let me just test this out on, you know, digital paper so that I don't get confused and have a semantics error later. Okay, let's write out the logic and make sure that it makes sense before we write the code. So when I say size, when I call array dot size, right? What does this return? It returns the integer value of the size of that array. So if the size of the array was 0 to 9, right? So index 0 to 9. So if the array was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 integer values, right? So it goes 1, 2, 3. We'll just do this one so it's easy to see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? And so when I call size, it should return a value of 10 because it goes up to index 9. Right? And so now what we're doing is we are saying for iterator in range old size not old z, old size, old size z. Okay, from old size to new size. I'm just going to say new size because it's better than, I mean, it's easier than writing out the whole enemy ships.size thing. So up until new size. Okay, now when you call the range function, this value is whatever you pass in minus 1, right? So if this new size, so if I had used actual number values, let's use a different color for that. So let's go with orange. So if the old size is 10 and I want to update the new size to be of size 15, right? Now this is automatically in brackets minus 1, right? So the index is going to be 14 at the end, but the total size of the array will still be 15, okay? And when I say 10 here, it's going to start from 10, which is exactly what we want. Remember, we don't want to change any of these guys because we have this rule, right? Always keep track of all enemy ships. Don't delete them, don't overwrite them. And so if I say from starting from 10, including 10, that means that up here we're going to add, right? We're going to change up the size. We're going to make it start from 10. So that's a new ship. It's not going to change 9. It's going to start from a new ship. And it's going to go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional ships. Okay? And that's exactly what we want. So the logic is sound. Let's go back to the script. And so from old size to enemy ships dot size. And remember that's minus 1. So if the size is 15, it's going to be up until 14, which is what we want, right? And so now everything else will work exactly as it should because these are all brand new ships. And when they are brand new ships, they should work exactly the same as if they were starting from the ready function. So now that's done. We can literally just, so this is enemy ships, right? Okay, so now I can copy this. From the ready function, I can copy the waypoint version of this, right? And then just paste it down here in the update waypoints function. Instead of pass, we just say this. But instead of going from waypoints.size, we start at old size. Again, we start at old size and we go up until waypoints.size. And now it works fine, okay? I'm happy with this, and we've run out of time. So I'm going to close things off here, and we can continue with this tomorrow in the next live stream, okay? So I'm going to say thank you to all of you for watching. Thank you to you for participating in the chat. Thank you very much for your feedback. I appreciate it very much. And then a shout out to Cubes, our junior DevVenturer. Thank you for your support. I appreciate it very much. And then in conclusion, thank you all for your time and your attention. I'll see you in the next live stream.